We thought it would be great to get together one more time and share our stories, share our successes, share our concerns, hear from some outside perspectives as to where the region and the Commonwealth are headed. And that is the goal, that today we will take away some new information, make some new contacts, and hopefully carry an agenda forward that we can work on in smaller groups together. I'd like to take 1 minute and acknowledge the folks that worked so hard to bring this together. And I'm not going to be able to read all your names because the light's low. So would you please, if you were on the committee, Steve Snell, George Klaus, Penny Myers, stand for 1 moment and let folks see who you are so they know who to blame. Penny, George, Dory, Carol. It was a great group of people, and they are acknowledged in the back of your program. I also want to just thank all of you for coming. I know that work is often such that it's really hard to budget a day away from your office. And so for you coming today, thank you. And we wouldn't be able to hold this event without the sponsors and the exhibitors who were able to make commitments. And I would like to specifically call out PNC Bank, that for many years has been a real believer and supporter of regional thinking, regional collaboration, working together. You'll hear a little bit from PNC at the lunch break. I'd like to ask that you please take a moment at the breakouts. There are going to be simple evaluation sheets. If you would please fill those out, as well as the evaluation at the end of the day. We really depend on the feedback. It helps us plan the next events. It also helps us set those agendas for the quarterly meetings that we hold, generally speaking, up at Penn State Harrisburg, where we can get together in a more casual manner and work on a few issues one by one. You'll see behind you in the breakout rooms, and they have their names on them. There's one other breakout room, which is to the lobby and out the door to the right, which is the First Capitol breakout room. So if you're looking for that one, you won't find it here. It's out there. And most of you may have found the restrooms already. They're in the center lobby area. I want to, again, thank you. This is really gratifying to see. We had hoped for 200, and I think we're at about 250 for our registrations. And now it's my opportunity to bring to the podium Representative Kevin Schreiber. Kevin has been previously with the City of Harrisburg as the Community Development and Economic Development Director, understands housing, has been a friend of housing, and now he is representing York and the surrounding communities in the General Assembly.
Thanks all. Thank you all very much. Thank you, of course, to our sponsors and to each and every one of you for coming out today. It really is a great time to come back to this event. You know, formerly I was coming to this event with the City of York, and obviously I was a member of the Housing Commission, so it's nice to address all of you as state representative coming up on my first year in office, which has been an interesting year to say the least, and I still get pushed into lockers, and they still give me wedgies, and I'm also one of the few Democrats in York County, so they pick on me there too. But at any rate, annually this is a great event, not only to bring sponsors together, but to bring our colleagues together. We all have a vested interest in York County. We have a vested interest in central Pennsylvania, and of course housing. Housing is a very integral industry in Pennsylvania and certainly in central PA. So I was fortunate to come here in the past with the City of York. I'm fortunate really to come here today as state representative. But I think many would likely agree through the early 2000s, through really the majority of the 2000s, York County and central Pennsylvania really benefited from housing. It was a fueling industry. We certainly benefited by that bubble, by the migration north from Maryland. But obviously the times have changed and our entire economy has changed. And while we're in hopefully the waning days or waning years of this recession, we are slowly trudging our way out of it. York County has generally held strong. We've held well. We've certainly not been as negatively impacted as other parts of the state or other parts of our country when you look at the foreclosure crises that occurred in California or Florida. So we have held strong. That's testament to our resiliency as a regional economy. But we certainly still have our challenges ahead. Over the majority of those 2000s, we had significant housing construction. In these years of the recession, we were fortunate to partner with PHFA, with FHA. We had 4 PHFA projects in the metropolitan York area: the George Street Commons project, the homes at Thaxton Park, Salem Square neighborhood, and the Carriage Works apartments out in West York. So we've had a great partnership in PHFA. We've had a great partner in a lot of you throughout this room that helped brought those projects to fruition. Throughout York, we've had other great projects with Habitat for Humanity or the York Area Development or the Housing Authority. So we continue to hold our own, but obviously we still have challenges ahead of us. And the city of York itself, and I know the Metropolitan York, have really focused on residential as a key component of community and economic development because we want more individuals with discretionary income living in our city and spending and supporting all of the amenities. And the city of York has come a long way, and we're doing very impressively right now, but we need all of your help to continue to move the ball forward and move this boulder up the mountain. But as we continue to move forward, as we climb out of this recession together, we still have our challenges ahead of us. Dealing with blight, dealing with absenteeism. Many of you know this was a challenge that I worked on with the City of York. It's a challenge that the Housing Advisory Commission has taken on as part of its priority projects. It's a challenge that's not only impacting the city anymore, it's impacting townships and boroughs. Our redevelopment authority of the County of York, RACI, is working with the Planning Commission and Felicia Dell's staff to develop a strategy to deal with blight in our townships and boroughs. So this is a problem that's impacting not just Pennsylvania cities, but all of our municipalities. So we, as housing providers or those that are linked to the housing industry, those in government, we've got to wrap our heads around this problem and try to deal with the fundamental components of it and try to help solve it. In addition to blight in our historic communities, in York and Hanover, we still have to wrestle with the proper balance of historic preservation and financial practicality, especially in an ever scrutinized economic times when lending is even more and more tough. Creditworthiness of home wanters. I'm speaking on behalf, I'm sure, of the Habitats and the York Area Developments, the housing authorities. We know that there are individuals that want to buy homes. We know that there are individuals that have money saved up to buy homes. We know that generally they might be living next door to these homes, renting and paying more in rent than they could in a mortgage, but they're 6 months, they're 12 months, they're 18 months away. So we need to figure out how we can improve that creditworthiness and get these individuals in the homes while certainly not perpetuating the predatory lending of years past. On the horizon, we in the state government, I think we in the federal government need to address student loan debt. I think the increased amounts of student loan debt impact our home buying as more and more young professionals delay marriage and are delaying marriage until their late 20s, early 30s, sometimes even into the 40s, and are shouldered with more and more debt. That means home buying is more of a challenge. So that's something where it's not necessarily on the agenda for today. It's not on the agenda as we often talk about housing challenges, but the amount of student loan debt, delayed marriage, which usually dual incomes helps advance people to home ownership, that's a challenge that we in state and federal government really need to work on. And we have to strike a better balance of mixed income neighborhoods. We cannot continue to concentrate poverty. This is an issue that the Housing Advisory Commission has taken on. I know in years past at the summit, concentration of poverty has been a topic of discussion. We've got to do a better job to deconcentrate poverty. As we know, concentration of poverty leads to distressed municipalities, distressed school districts, devaluation of property. It degrades investment quality. So these are all things that are all inextricably linked, and that we in government, we in the private sector, the public sector, the not-for-profit sector, we really need to work together to try to resolve this. And certainly, we're no panacea. There's no utopian society out there, but in York County and central Pennsylvania, we've got to do a better job of wrapping our heads around the concentrations of poverty, which also then is linked to, of course, the holy grail of reforms, property tax reform. I really do want to thank the realtors in the room and RAYAC. I know they have taken property tax on as a charge the York Housing Advisory Commission. Most of us in this room probably want property tax reform. There are a couple competing bills out there. And hopefully with the muscle of the Pennsylvania Realtors Association and with our local York Adams Realtors Association, they can work to improve either of these bills. No bill is perfect, obviously, and most should probably be imperfect. But if we can try to resolve the funding discrepancies in a couple of these bills, hopefully we can get them forward and get some property tax reform for Pennsylvania and certainly for central Pennsylvania. So the work today is important. I thank our sponsors again. I thank all of you for coming out, and I'm certain that this will be a very worthwhile day, and look forward to the results and look forward to continue working with you. And I thank you all for what you do in central Pennsylvania to keep our housing industry moving forward and to keep our area and regional basis moving forward. Thank you all very much.
It's pretty refreshing to have a legislator who grasps housing issues. Thank you, Kevin. Now I'd like to introduce to the podium Commissioner Chris Riley. Commissioner Riley has been a former mayor. He's now on his fourth term, 15 years. They've really sped by. He's a former board member and thinker behind the South Central Assembly. And I've asked him to come offer a commissioner's point of view, and welcome.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Craig. Craig and I go back a long way. We spend some time together outside of work, and we were walking through a graveyard the other day, and we came upon this headstone that says, "Here lies a politician and an honest man." And Craig turned to me and said, "Now, how did they get two bodies in one grave?" He's a very funny guy. I don't know if you know that. My job today is to officially welcome you to York County. Craig said that many of you are from outside the county, and we certainly welcome you here. This is a very important gathering. It's my second opportunity to welcome the group to York, and hopefully you're going to have a very successful day. The British economist Thomas Malthus, he of Malthusian theory fame, contended that food, shelter, and clothing, in that order, were essential to human life and our ability to not only survive, but thrive and multiply as a species. So suitable housing is a key component of our existence. Access to good housing impacts our health and well-being. Housing patterns are related to our quality of life, education, crime, preservation of open space, and other issues that shape our personal family economies. As county commissioner, I view housing as a barometer of the overall health of our community. Our general condition is good. York County has experienced tremendous growth over the past 2 decades, and most of the growth is attributed to a dynamic housing market. In particular, we've had a huge influx of Marylanders who found better home values in the county and are willing to commute to work from the southern tier of the county. But we have had our challenges, as Kevin told you, related to a major economic downturn. York County has experienced a record number of foreclosures and a more sluggish return to a healthy housing market. But we're getting there. We're going to be back stronger than ever. Certainly with your work today, that will contribute to that effort. On behalf of the Board of Commissioners and our residents, I would like to offer you best wishes for a successful summit, and I hope you enjoy your time here in York. And in closing, I'd like to thank Steve Snell for providing some of the factual background for my remarks. RAYAC does a tremendous job, as Kevin pointed out, in pushing housing issues, not only on a political level, but on an economic level. And we appreciate all they do. So welcome to York County. Have a great summit and have some fun along the way. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. Chris and I like to walk in the cemeteries often. We don't get so much verbal opposition there. And now it's my privilege to introduce to you Barry Denk. Some of you may have been at our event a few years ago. Barry is I think, one of the really bright lights in Harrisburg in terms of taking hard facts, digging through them, doing some serious thinking and analyzing and saying, hey folks, we're heading in this direction. And I believe today he's going to be sharing with us some very recent results of some analysis of census and other information and giving us something to think about for the rest of the day. So Barry, with the Executive Director of the Center for Rural PA.
Good morning, everyone. How are we doing today? Craig asked if I had any problems getting here, and I said getting out of Harrisburg was the only challenge that I have, and that's often, you hear that from people, getting out of Harrisburg. But it is a pleasure to drive down 83 and to be in South Central Pennsylvania today in York. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, George. Thank you, everybody, for the invite to be back with you today to chat about some things that the Center has just finished in terms of census and in terms of what this region and this Commonwealth will look like in 2040. And that's a long ways down the road. And it's challenging for legislators, for citizens, for those who influence or affect policy to think that far out. We are an instant society. All we can think about is our iPhones and our emails and our instant messages. We want data, we want information, we want results now. And for legislators, they are asked to do things right now. They are focused now on the budget. We all want a budget by June 30th, and we all want our slice of the pie. And so it is a challenge for all of us to think into the future. But I think we need to do that. We need to have a picture into the future, not because it will predict what will happen, because we control what will happen down the road. But we do need to have information that can help us plan, to help us think about what the future may look like, and the roles that we take in directing and leading the future and change as compared to reacting to the results of change. So with that, I'd like to present some information for your consideration today. An awful lot of data. I'm going to go over it fairly quickly. I guess the one thing I would leave for all of you is if you want additional information, if you want additional analysis from some of the data that you see today, please feel free to call us. The Center is a legislative agency of the Pennsylvania House and Senate, bipartisan, bicameral. We obviously focus on rural, but we cover the entire state in terms of the data that we have available and the data that we analyze. All of it is out in the open. It's free to anybody who wants it, needs it. And I think the value added of the data is the analysis that we present and provide for you so that you can take it and use it for meaningful purpose. So with that, we will start. We are a legislative agency, as I mentioned. That's right, go ahead. Our database, I do believe it's the most comprehensive that is available in the state. In addition to all the census data going way back to the 1900s, we have data from every state agency that exists so that we can put together a comprehensive profile of the entire Commonwealth, of rural, of urban, of suburban, even down to the minor civil division level. So we just finished a study. We contracted with the Penn State Data Center, that is the official data center for the Commonwealth, for the U.S. Census Bureau. And they did an analysis and a study of population projections through the year 2040. They used baseline data, and then they pulled out of it group quarters. They took out prison populations. They took out student populations, because we know how that can look in terms of numbers and make you think, wow, we're growing so rapidly, but it's because of a prison population. Cameron County is the classic example of that. And so this is the data that we'll present for you today. That's the model. I'm not going to go into detail as to how they did it, but it was a very thorough methodological process, and it was all based on population information, morbidity, mortality, birth, death rates. There was no economic factoring involved in that. And sometimes people say, well, you don't account for economic development. We're going to recruit a business that's going to pull in 400 people. That's so unpredictable. And so the analysis that they did is based solely on demographics, morbidity, mortality, looking at the past and projecting into the future. And so you can see the numbers through 2040. Pennsylvania's population is projected to increase to over 14 million by the year 2040. You can see the urban and you can see the rural areas of the Commonwealth in terms of where that population is to occur. We will remain a rural state. About 25% of Pennsylvania's population will be classified as rural. We still will live in about 75% of the land area. That is a challenge often for rural Pennsylvania in terms of the smaller voice, the smaller numbers of people, but obviously covering 75% of the land area. But you can see how the growth pattern will occur to over 14 million citizens in this Commonwealth. And I've got some more information as to who will make up that population, because that, I think, has major implications for this Commonwealth and great opportunity for us as a whole. This is in particular for the South Central Pennsylvania region, and as the representative said, this area has grown, and is projected to continue to grow throughout the next couple decades into 2040. Now, that is different for all the 8 counties of the South Central area. Not all will experience the growth that others have. York is continued to project to grow. Adams County will still see that influx from the Baltimore, Washington crowd, certainly as is Franklin County as well. So there will be sporadic growth throughout the South Central region, but as a whole, you will continue to grow. This shows that rate of growth. Obviously, way back in the 1950s to 60s, you can see how high the growth was. It dropped down, it peaked a little bit. And so our growth is slowing, but it still will continue to grow. We've got the United States as a whole, we've got Pennsylvania, and in that red line is the South Central region. And so we will continue to grow, but at a much slower rate. South Central Pennsylvania will grow at a faster rate than the state as a whole. And so there are some implications for this Commonwealth in terms of our role in the national level, with our slower population growth and where those population centers will be, again, in South, Southwest, and the West Coast of this nation. And so the challenge that we face if we lose more congressional seats because of the population shifts and what that means for Pennsylvania, and particularly what it means for rural Pennsylvania if we continue to lose a voice in Washington for that rural part of Pennsylvania. We are not Wyoming. We are not Montana. We are a different rural, and that rural voice in Washington does need to be heard. This looks at the rate of population. Up at the top, the small picture of the state shows from 1980 to 2010, and then 2010 to 2040 is projected. You can see in those blue line county areas, that is the greatest population growth percentage-wise, 10% or higher. Obviously, if you look down in the South Central part of the Commonwealth, you are projected to continue to grow at a more rapid rate than other parts of the Commonwealth. We will continue to see some of those challenges of eastern Pennsylvania versus western Pennsylvania. The economic decline that occurred because of the decline of steel and coal back in the 80s still is felt in southwestern Pennsylvania, and the loss of our young citizens. Erie County stands out for its growth rate, but you can see the growth patterns and where the growth is really concentrated in terms of population percentage growth through the year 2040. This looks at a different way, the age cohorts. If you look at 1970 in the upper top left, that red grouping, that's us, the baby boomers, and we were kind of holding up the rest of the population. You can see at the top, people were not living all that long back then, they were passing on. But then look at 2010, and that's where the baby boomer generation is. There's more of us, we're living longer, and look underneath, that undergirding, if you will, of population that could support us baby boomers as we grow older. Naturally, the concern, and then you move into 2040, and you see us baby boomers and where we will be at in 2040, but look at the population spread underneath. Obviously, concerns about Social Security, concerns about Medicare, who's going to be in the workforce, paying those taxes, paying real estate taxes, paying earned income taxes that support local governments, local projects, etc. Naturally, the concern in terms of that baby boomer generation and where we are moving up the line and those underneath us to support us and to support communities as a whole. This looks at the issue of our youth and our older adults in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania statewide is on the left, South Central is on the right. You will still be in a better position than the rest of the state in terms of youth and in terms of older adults. For the state as a whole, we really will be at a crossroads where we will have more citizens 65 and older than we will have youth 18 and younger. And that's even further exacerbated when you break out just the rural part of the Commonwealth, the 48 counties that we classify as rural. But the state as a whole really will be faced with major challenges. Workforce issues in terms of who will comprise the workforce, programs and services, clearly housing for older adults. When you look at the number of 65 and older plus and the decline of our 18 and under youth, particularly in the state as a whole. South Central, you're still hanging in there in terms of retaining and keeping and growing your youth. Go ahead, please. This looks at what we call the age dependency ratio. And what we did was take a look at those who are 18 and younger and those who are 65 and older. And we classified them as a dependent type of group. Younger people who aren't working by and large, who need education, who need services, and then the older 65 and plus who need some services, etc. And then in the middle are what we call the labor force, the potential labor force. And so where we are faced as a state, and it's a little bit hard for me to see that number, but our dependency ratio for the state as a whole will be 100 persons in that working age category versus 90.8 in that dependency ratio. That's almost a 1-for-1. And so again, the challenges that presents in terms of incomes, revenues, tax bases, services that people are asking government to support, whether it's public education, K through 12, whether it's senior citizen services, whether it's affordable housing, et cetera, et cetera. And so that is a challenge for this Commonwealth in terms of that dependency ratio increasing. South Central Pennsylvania, obviously you're in a better situation where your dependency ratio is about 86 per 100. Still not ideal by any stretch, but better off than the state as a whole. Go ahead, please. And this looks at that age dependency ratio for all 67 counties. Those red counties are an age dependency of 90 persons classified as a dependent, if you will, versus 100 folks in the labor pool who could be working, paying taxes, providing services, being volunteers in your community, running for public office, whatever you want to consider that. But that shows the challenges for this Commonwealth down the road in terms of how we balance needs for goods and services that in part may be supported by public tax dollars, demands and opportunities that present themselves for the private sector as well. Just because there's an older audience doesn't mean that they aren't consumers of goods and services, and it provides economic opportunities for this Commonwealth. It clearly has implications in terms of housing for those citizens and different types. We provided data to an organization that is looking at establishing some housing in 2 parts of the Commonwealth where they want to build a facility where older adults will reside who are not related at all. They are independent in that they will have their separate sleeping quarters, but they will share living quarters and kitchen opportunities. It's a new trend in housing that they're looking at for older adults who, for some reason, do not want to live alone or cannot live alone anymore, but certainly do not need assisted living and certainly do not need any type of nursing care or adult daycare or adult foster care. So we are challenged with opportunities in terms of what our housing system and structure and infrastructure will look like for that dependent crowd, if you will, as we grow older and down the state. This is a challenge for the Commonwealth as a whole in terms of our births and our deaths. We are not growing ourselves naturally. We are having, particularly in rural Pennsylvania, more deaths than we have births. In 2011, in 29 of the 48 rural states or counties, we had more deaths than we had births. And that trend is continuing, and often because of outmigration of youth, but because, as the representative said, people are marrying older, people are deciding not to have as many children or any children at all. So our natural birth rate is just not keeping up in some areas with our death rate. Again, South Central is in a much better situation than the rest of the Commonwealth. And that chart on the right shows you where your births are continuing to increase as deaths are as well, but there's still a margin there. And so you are growing yourselves naturally, but it's not going to be enough to replenish, if you will, those who are passing on. And this looks at natural population change, and natural population change is that births and deaths and how that plays out. And again, in the south central area of the Commonwealth, in those purple counties and in some other areas, you will have projected through 2040 more positive natural change. Those white areas will have negative natural change, meaning more deaths than births. So as a Commonwealth and for state level policy, in terms of how legislators deal with those challenges, of how we grow ourselves and make ourselves competitive within this nation and within this world, some challenges for us to think about down the road. Please. This looks at in-migration, people who will move into the Commonwealth. And that is happening. We are seeing people move in. And this is through 2040. And the purple areas are 10,000 and more. And again, you can see in different parts of the Commonwealth, particularly again in South Central, where you will have in-migration. People will find this area an attractive place to live and to work and to play. And so you will see people moving in. In some parts of rural Pennsylvania, if you're not a third or fourth generation resident, you are an outsider. And so that can present challenges for communities to grow and develop. Who will be the volunteer fireman or woman to show up as a first responder? Who will run for public office? Who will run the Girl Scout cookie campaign? If we are not accepting of those who are not third or fourth generation folks, that will present us with some challenges in terms of how we grow ourselves. If you look at non-natives moving into this country, particularly or exclusively from the point of entrepreneurship, the highest rate of entrepreneurship with people moving into this country are Chinese and Asians. And so, how receptive are we to the potential entrepreneur who may start up a new business and hire your nephew, your son, your daughter, and give them a start? Who might take over a business that is ready to close because the gentleman or the woman is 70 and says, I've had enough and I want to close my doors, but I don't have somebody else to take on. Opportunities for us, but in some areas, those opportunities will be major challenges because of preset minds about who we are and what this Commonwealth should look like down the road. This is projected natural change and net migration. And this, I think, is important for the Commonwealth as a whole to really take a look at and understand. And so on the left is Pennsylvania as a whole, and that shows our growth and development. From natural births and deaths, you can see that yellow piece is a small part of the pie. Most of the growth for Pennsylvania as a whole through 2040 will come from in-migration. We will not grow ourselves to that 14 million person point by natural birth. It will be because people have decided to move into this Commonwealth. But when you look at who's moving into this Commonwealth, and that blue part is the higher portion, it's people coming in from overseas. People moving into this country and deciding to reside in Pennsylvania. And the pie chart on the right is South Central. You're split pretty much in the middle in terms of natural growth and in-migration, contributing to your total population growth. But you can see that blue part on the right. Most of your in-migration will also come from overseas. So for some folks, that could be a major challenge. For some folks, that could be a golden opportunity. For this region, it could be a golden opportunity in terms of those folks coming in terms of accepting them into your communities, embracing them in their diversity, and embracing the contributions that they can make. Also considering what their needs are based on their culture and their backgrounds and their interests and their likes. Housing, what type of housing, What types of businesses? What types of quality of life do we offer those folks that make your area a more attractive area and region for people to live in and to contribute to? So, major opportunities, but also I think for some challenges in terms of how welcoming and receptive this Commonwealth is. Because if we do not, we will be behind the 8 ball in terms of the nation as a whole and where we stand to influence public policy and to make this place an attractive Commonwealth for businesses to stay, to remain, to grow, and to locate in. Next, please. And this looks at rural and urban counties in terms of population growth down the road. Our population density will increase. Right now, based on the population of 2010, our density is 284 persons per square mile. That will increase, I think, to about 306 or 16, but we will remain a rural state. 48 of our counties will remain rural based on that population density area. But again, you can see South Central, Southeastern Pennsylvania in terms of the urbanality, if you will, of this Commonwealth. Go ahead, Veronica. So, of those numbers that were crunched by Penn State for us, and taking a look at them and saying, okay, what does this mean? I've addressed some of that for you, but we've kind of wrapped it up in terms of what we think are some implications of the data and the projections of those data for the future, and what you all might want to consider for South Central Pennsylvania, but certainly for the Commonwealth as a whole. And again, as the representative indicated, a slower growth in new housing. There is an awful lot of housing stock available. Will it be suitable for those people who live here down the road? What adaptations might need to be made for that existing housing stock to be used suitably? So that is something to be considered. Again, that shift in the housing demand, and I think you're seeing that already in terms of large families scaling down to smaller families. And so the numbers of people and the type of housing that's available, the revitalization of housing in older boroughs and cities. Obviously, you have programs underway now that deal with that. I think the opportunity for revitalization of housing stock in existing boroughs and cities will increase for you all. With lower demand, prices could stabilize for housing as well. And the challenges of keeping older adults in their homes longer. That has major implications, particularly when you look at the cost of healthcare and the desire and the practice for the past 10, 20 years of creating more services that keep older adults in their homes as compared to putting them into institutions. And that housing example that I just told you about of people who aren't related moving into one big building, that I think will continue to present itself as an opportunity for options for older adult housing for communities. Implications in terms of families and households. Obviously, smaller households, less children. Again, in South Central Pennsylvania, your birth rates are going to be going much better, doing much better than the state as a whole, but historically we're seeing much smaller families. That will be changed a little bit when you look at Lancaster, the Amish, and some others who still have some larger families. That skews the data a little bit for South Central Pennsylvania, particularly for Lancaster area. But by and large, we're looking at smaller families, smaller households. Potential increased number of multi-generational households. Some of you may be experiencing that already with parents moving in, or you moving in with parents, or with younger people moving in. Again, the representative talked about college debt and what that means for young folks. Some of them moving back with their families and staying with them because of the debt load that they have to service. And so that whole issue or opportunity of multi-generational housing and what that means for communities and housing stock that exists. And also a likely increase in single-person households. More people desiring or needing to stay single and not moving in with others and maintaining their own residence. Economic development. Potential labor shortages for some businesses. for the Commonwealth, particularly as a whole, but possibly even in parts of South Central Pennsylvania. When you look at that dynamic of younger folks and the labor pool moving up, older adults who may want to or need to stay in the workforce longer, and we're seeing that already. So what accommodations do businesses need to do for older adults who have something to contribute, but maybe they can't do an 8-hour workday? Maybe they can do job sharing, et cetera, et cetera. So opportunities in terms of that workforce, but some challenges as well. Maybe stagnant or lower income tax revenues. When you look at the types of businesses that might operate, service industries, et cetera, the wages that can be paid, et cetera, and what that means for incomes and contributions through earned income taxes. Increased demand for businesses to serve that older population, and I've talked about that already. I think major opportunities for that entrepreneur who can provide a good or service for that older adult who still has some disposable income. Recreational and leisure opportunities as well. Education. If things stay the same as they are, and that may change within the next week or so, or certainly before June 30th, in terms of how we traditionally have funded public education, but not necessarily seeing major changes in school taxes in terms of the need to support that. Where that tax comes from or who it comes from may change, but clearly public dollars will be needed to support public education. And even in areas that are seeing growth, you may see some closings. And I think you're experiencing that already. We see that in rural Pennsylvania quite a bit, where a lot of development is occurring outside that borough. And so some of those older schools, people want to close them. They want schools closer to their kids. They don't want their kids on buses for long periods of time, but that comes at a cost. So even in areas where there may be decline in population, doesn't mean that school construction will stop. So there will be some challenges for physical infrastructure for education and what is done for them. And the cost of higher education. We are number 7 in the nation with the number of post-secondary education institutions in this Commonwealth. We are 28 in the nation with the number of adults who have some level of post-secondary education. We have parts of rural Pennsylvania. We currently have an 11-county area of rural Pennsylvania that doesn't have higher education access. They rely on distance education or community-based organizations. We are blessed in South Central Pennsylvania to have quite a number of post-secondary, very fine post-secondary education institutions to choose from. That is not an option for parts of this Commonwealth as a whole. And so while some may say, well, that's not in my backyard, I don't need to be worried about that or concerned about that. But we are in fact one Commonwealth. And I firmly believe in all of the presentations that I make in terms of the data that we provide, it is never to pit rural against urban or urban against rural with suburban in there as well. We are one Commonwealth, and I believe firmly that what happens in Potter County affects Philadelphia and vice versa. And so the more that we can think about the betterment of the entire Commonwealth and where we're moving down the road, I think the Commonwealth as a whole will be better off. And that's a challenge for all of us to think and act outside of our respective boxes. But it really is something that we have to do in order for Pennsylvania to be more competitive down the road. And so healthcare and human services, which consume an awful lot of the gross national product, and certainly consume an awful lot in terms of tax dollars, some challenges for us down the road. Increased opportunity/need for home health care services, transportation, assisted living, medical specialties that can focus on geriatric needs, and maybe some more quiet maternity wards versus some geriatric units. And so the whole healthcare delivery system. When you look at that chart, in South Central Pennsylvania, you will have almost 91 adults in South Central Pennsylvania at 85 years and plus. Massive jump in growth through 2040 in that population. Some of those people may be able to still retain independent living. Chances are a number of those won't. They'll need some sort of housing services and assistance and basic housing to meet their needs. But when you look at where you're at now, based on 2010 data, you're at 42,000. That will double by the year 2040. And again, some may say, hey, that's 20-some years out. I don't need to be concerned about that. I would suggest the opposite. We really do need to look down the road and think about that and what that may mean for this region as a whole. And so in terms of community and where you are, and you can define your community as the city of York, you can define your community as Springettsbury Township, you can define your community as Gettysburg Borough, you can define your community as the 8 counties of South Central Pennsylvania. However you define community and what it means to you, there are some challenges that we need to think about down the road. Volunteer organizations may find it difficult to recruit members. Again, especially when you're looking at that 18 and younger or 65 and older crowd, in terms of their abilities to volunteer as a fireman or firewoman or EMT individual, serving on a lot of very worthwhile nonprofit organization boards, United Way campaigns, et cetera, et cetera. The opportunity for those who are migrating into this area is to how we welcome and accept them and challenge them to be parts of our community. But we may be faced with some challenges in terms of that human infrastructure to support some very worthwhile causes. Fewer youth. Again, this is pretty much the state as a whole, but there are some areas of South Central that will see fewer youth to support or to involve and get engaged in all types of community-based services. A shift in citizen needs, young adults versus older adults, and what we do to support them. And as a baby boomer, I'm going to want to take part in some of those programs and services. And I think there's a lot like us who want to remain active in our community and will be looking for things that our community can offer us in terms of quality of life. With fewer persons working, community organizations may see declines in revenues. This could affect very worthwhile campaigns like United Way, churches, et cetera, et cetera. Another opportunity, though, and we've done research on this and I've spoken to a number of audiences, is this transfer of wealth. And I'm going to spend just a quick minute on this before I wrap up. There is tremendous wealth in Pennsylvania. We did a study in 2000 based on 2005 data. That was pre-recession. It was also pre-Marcellus Shale. There is tremendous wealth, and we are going to contract to update that study this summer, so we will have more current data available. But there is wealth that exists throughout this Commonwealth that will be passing on from one generation to the next. The opportunity is for communities to talk to those folks, to garner some of that wealth as another heir to their estate, whether it's devoted to specifically to a community foundation or some worthwhile cause. But before that money leaves this Commonwealth and goes to the grandkids living in North Carolina, we have an opportunity to garner some of that wealth for worthwhile projects. But it's not a matter of saying, we want your money. It's a matter of saying South Central Pennsylvania has a quality of life that is unique and different. And those citizens have benefited and enjoyed it over the years. Would you consider sharing some of that wealth that you've accumulated so that the next generation can benefit from that? And clearly we see the work of community foundations in terms of libraries and arts and culture. But wouldn't it be interesting if you had a pot of money that came from some citizens that was clearly devoted to underwriting and financing entrepreneurship? Because bank financing may not be available or appropriate, because we know entrepreneurs are risky ventures. Most entrepreneurs start their business on a credit card or with family underwriting, and they're collateralized up the kazoo in terms of personal assets. But if there was a little pot of money that was available to help finance, and through sweat equity and some other means, they could collateralize that, didn't say that quite well, borrow it and pay back so it fed itself. We're seeing that in some parts of Pennsylvania. I've seen it 6 times since I've been to the state of Nebraska and looked at their Nebraska Community Foundation and what they've done with their transfer of wealth to underwrite and support community businesses and development. I've been to counties that have 6,000 citizens, Ord County, Nebraska, where they have a community foundation with over $30-some million in assets because people believe in the future and they've seen the return on investment with young people moving back. I'm going to piggyback with one other study that we just released a couple months ago. We surveyed youth in rural Pennsylvania about their educational, their career, and their residential aspirations. And those rural youth told us we probably will need to leave this area to get an education and to start a career. But we want to move back to rural Pennsylvania to start our families. It offers a quality of life. And I think that same mindset would hold true for South Central Pennsylvania. You may see some of your children leaving. My 2 kids live in Philadelphia right now. But at some point, they may want to come back to Mechanicsburg because they know the quality of life that they had available to them down the road. And so what can we do with that generation to encourage them to come back? So looking forward to 2040, what will our communities look like? How attractive will they be so that those kids who are 6 and 10 and 12 now may say, I'm probably going to leave this area, but I'm going to move back because of what it did for me as I was growing up. There's a lot of good stock in our youth. We just need to engage them more often and find out that they really aren't all that turned off about what's going on in the community and about what can be done to make it a better place. That's it. Thank you. You've been very patient. I didn't see anybody falling asleep. It's a lot of food for thought. I hope it will help energize you. I saw the program. You have some phenomenal resource people here available on your panels today. Take availability of them. And if you have any needs for data, consider the center as a resource for you. Thank you.
My name is Clay Lambert. I'm with the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. I'm one of the 2 business development officers in the Homeownership Programs Division. And we're here basically to represent PHFA, let more people know about the affordable housing programs we have to offer, some of the lending opportunities that people can find throughout the community and throughout the state. PHFA is a lender basically at the state level, helping more Pennsylvanians throughout the state find safe, decent, and affordable housing. We do that through a number of different initiatives, from business developments throughout the state, housing developments, affordable homeownership programs, tax credits, as well as our Homeowners Emergency Mortgage Assistance Program.
My name is Lee Woodmansey, and I am the chairman of the York Housing Advisory Commission. And my job today, among other things, is to moderate the program, the noon program on the big what ifs. So if the presenters would gradually filter up here, I have a few announcements to make ahead of time. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming. It's a great group of people. The programs have been excellent. I think you've enjoyed them as well. I'd like to thank the sponsors, the exhibitors, for their support. One of the prime sponsors that we have, the premier sponsor level, is PNC Bank. And I know Chris Rocky's here someplace. You here, Chris? Chris is over there. I was wondering if I could impose upon him to come up and say a few words about PNC Bank and work they're doing. And again, to thank you for the premier sponsorship.
Well, I don't need a microphone. I'm amongst friends and colleagues, so on behalf of PNC, thank you for everything you're doing to support our communities. PNC has a long history of supporting the communities we serve. And I think it's safe to say on behalf of PNC and all the other sponsors, thank you to the Assembly for all the work you're doing to support our communities. And I can't think of something more important and more impactful than a housing summit, especially recovery, what we're going to learn today. I would encourage many of you, I know I see many of my partners out there when we're thinking about our strategic and comprehensive plans, let's really start thinking about what Barry presented this morning about the changing socioeconomic demographics of the state. That's going to be key to our success of our future. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. One more small plug. The York Housing Advisory Commission, which I mentioned before I'm the chair of, is a group, an organization made up of people from the York County area, sponsored by the York County government and the city of York. And we meet on a monthly basis and to mull over some of the questions that we're talking about here today and try to find ways in York County that we can create programs or perhaps not create programs, but get other agencies to do those programs in such a way as to promote housing across the county. We have 4 standing committees: affordable housing, housing choice, education and outreach, and the homeless special needs, also called continuum of care. And we talk about these topics at every monthly meeting, and we certainly would ask that any of you who are interested can certainly sit in on those meetings and just let me or another member. Matter of fact, why don't we have all the members of the YHAC stand up, if you would. Just don't say anything, just stand up. So thank you. These are the people who you can talk to about the activities of the YHAC, so be sure to buttonhole them and do just that. And we have a very good group of people talking about the big what if, which sounds like a movie somehow. So I'll go through a brief introduction of each one and get right to the meat of the program. First person is Jane Vincent. Jane was appointed by President Barack Obama as a regional administrator for the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development Region 3, which includes DC, Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and West Virginia. In this role, she works with others to create strong, sustainable, inclusive communities and quality, affordable homes for all. She's responsible for the oversight of $47.3 billion portfolio of programs and services and more than 600 employees. Ed Geiger is the director of the Center of Community Financing within the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development. He administers nearly all of DCED's community development housing programs to provide financial assistance to local governments, community groups, nonprofits, and housing developers. He is focused on developing initiatives such as restructuring the Main Street, Elm Street, and Enterprise Zone business development programs into the Keystone Communities program. He has also led the initiative to utilize $88 million over 5 years via the federal Section 108 loan guarantee program. He manages the implementation of the Neighborhood Stabilization Program and helps coordinate the Commonwealth's rural continuums of care and interagency efforts for homelessness. He's a past president of the Board of Directors for the Council of State Community Development Agencies and has led Pennsylvania to become the first state in the nation to revise its consolidated plan to incorporate outcome measures and later managed the effort to have the Commonwealth become the first state to implement HUD's new performance measurement system. Next, we have Chris Estes, President and CEO of the National Housing Conference. Chris became President and CEO of the National Housing Conference in 2012. He comes to the NHC after 9 years as Executive Director of the North Carolina Housing Coalition, one of the nation's best-known state housing groups. Prior to his work with the coalition, Chris worked for one of those acronyms, CAHEC, something like that, a regional tax credit equity syndicator, and DHIC, a nonprofit affordable housing developer in Raleigh, as well as several other area nonprofits as a resource development officer. And last but certainly not least, Liz Hirsch, the Executive Director of the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania. She's a native Pennsylvanian, and she's working to build an effective advocacy network for the Housing Alliance. Under her leadership, the Housing Alliance has tripled its membership base and budget while becoming a well-respected source for expert information on housing policy, not only in Pennsylvania but nationally as well. She's a professional social worker with a master's degree from the University of Chicago. Over the course of a varied 30-year career in human services, she has served as Bureau Chief of the Illinois Department of Public Aid, Executive Director of the Tenants Action Group of Philadelphia, and Executive Director of the Blueprint to End Homelessness in the Philadelphia area. So with that, that's our speakers, and I would ask each of them to try to go in 5-minute bursts because we have a lot of topics, a lot of big what ifs, And I also would encourage them to ask each other questions as the time arises. So, Liz Hirsch, would you like to start?
All right, the challenge is to turn on the mic. It's on. Okay, great. What if we didn't have homelessness anymore in Pennsylvania? What if everybody who wanted to buy a house and could afford to do so was able to succeed? What if every person who wanted to fix up their house and have it be decent for themselves was able to do that? What if we weren't getting together every year to talk about all the major problems we had in housing because we were talking about the solutions? Our challenge today, I think, is when we go into these workshops and we're kind of digging in the weeds, is also to remember the big picture of that we do have the power and we do have the knowledge to be able to solve the most pressing housing problems that are facing all of our communities, whether they are rural or suburban or urban. The contribution of the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania to try and make that what if a reality at this juncture is to try and expand our State Housing Trust Fund. We're going to try and do this in two ways. The State Housing Trust Fund was capitalized in 2011 with some Marcellus Shale impact fee dollars. And guess what? It is working. It is working. There's 1,700 homes in production. Some of them are rental rehabs, some of them are owner-occupied rehabs, some are master leases, some's rental assistance, and some of them are development of tax credit units. It's all locally based, coming in at about $10,000 a unit on average. It's working. We have something that's actually working that we can point to as a model. So let's expand it from the 37 counties where it exists to the rest of the 67 counties in Pennsylvania. So we have a proposal. We expect legislation to be introduced this week that will establish a new revenue source to expand the State Housing Trust Fund. Now, all of you know a bill is different from a law. 2,000 bills get introduced every session. 200 bills become law. But that's where we get into the power that we have to take a really good idea, something that's working, something that each of you in your own lives and in your own careers, you know what works. And to go to our elected representatives and say, look, what we're doing is working. We have more demand than we could possibly ever meet. Hardworking people playing by the rules. And if we had this expansion of the State Housing Trust Fund, we could make this community even stronger and our local economy even stronger. Because every dollar that goes into a State Housing Trust Fund generates $2.28 in economic activity. And every $1 million in the trust fund creates 20 full-time equivalent jobs. Not just construction, although that's a big piece, but also white-collar jobs. So that's the first thing we're doing. The second thing we're doing is to expand the Neighborhood Assistance Program. How many of you are familiar with the Neighborhood Assistance Program? It's a tax credit. What we are proposing to do is to build on the Neighborhood Assistance Program. First of all, make it competitive with the Educational Improvement Tax Credit, because right now it has not kept pace. Second of all, expand it to provide housing assistance for vulnerable people, veterans who are homeless, children aging out of foster care, seniors, people with disabilities who shouldn't be homeless. The third thing we're proposing is to create an affordable housing tax credit, something that other of our neighboring states have had for many years, which we have never had. And we are proposing to allow it to serve intermediaries so that rural communities have a shot at better using this tax credit. That bill is going to be filed tomorrow. Again, that's a bill, this is a law. And so the challenge for each of us is to say, what if I used my power of persuasion, my time, the good work of my organization, a little bit of the energy that I have to make the economy and the local housing market do what it has the potential to do. So our message to you today is help us take that what if and make it a reality by supporting these two initiatives, the expansion of the State Housing Trust Fund, successful working, and the expansion of the Neighborhood Assistance Program tax credit so that we can help more people have the home that they need. Thanks.
That was well done. And I'm going to give you some what ifs from the federal perspective, specifically some what ifs with maybe some tools attached. Again, a little bit of a different level perspective. Again, the what if on what if we could end homelessness? There are lots of programs out there. There are lots of federal efforts. I've got to tell you that this what if is one of President Obama's biggest initiatives. It's one that Sean Donovan, our secretary at HUD, has really been focused on. In the past couple of years, we've been able to see a reduction in veterans homelessness by 24%, a reduction in chronic homelessness by 16%. And for those of you who are not watching the flyers tonight, but are rather watching NCIS, which I've never seen, I understand the topic is veterans homelessness. So this is a big what if. There are a lot of local efforts, some really focused in on Pennsylvania. We have mayors stepping up to the plate to say, we want to end veterans homelessness. So there's a lot of local effort, and many of you may already be involved. What if we had enough housing counseling to really make a difference for both pre-purchase, post-purchase, pre-foreclosure, whatever? So this year in the proposed budget for 2015, HUD has increased yet again our ask for more housing counseling dollars, sorely needed. Many of you probably were at the forefront of the effort to restore housing counseling when it was pulled out of the budget just a couple of years ago. We're also proposing a new housing counseling effort to really broaden and expand what we're doing, known as HAWK, Homeowners Armed with Knowledge. Again, a big emphasis on housing counseling. It's such an important part of not only our housing programs, but also, as everyone in this room knows, the economy is really based and revolves around housing. And if folks didn't know it before, I think they sure know it by now. What if your zip code was not an indicator of how you're going to grow up? Your health, your education, your employment levels. There are lots of studies out there that show that, and a lot of our historic development patterns bear that out. Where affordable housing is located, if it's in a lower income neighborhood, it's almost an indicator that the folks who grow up there and never move away will be stuck in that same pattern. So what if we had ways to counsel folks who are in voucher programs about, gee, why don't you think about moving across town or into the next county where maybe you'd have some more education availability or employment availability or access to transportation. We had a big summit on this in January. There's a lot of interested folks. There's a couple of programs going on in Chicago and Baltimore, and we're working to get one started in southeastern Pennsylvania. Please go to our website. The information from that summit is readily available, both the speakers and some of their documentation. What if affordable housing could really play a part in the President's Climate Action Plan? And indeed it can through our Better Buildings Challenge. We're asking housing authorities and multifamily developers to step up and see what kinds of things they can do for energy improvements. Can we get to zero carbon footprint? There are some great examples in Philadelphia and in Baltimore about engaging tenants and owners about managing your own energy. For instance, I'm a classic dieter. I watch my diet. I write down everything I spend on everything I eat. That helps me manage my food. If you could monitor your energy usage, would you indeed use less energy? In Baltimore, they're showing that you can, and tenants in the Cherry Hill neighborhood have reduced their energy consumption by a combination of active tenant engagement and making some improvements in the units lowered their energy uses by 28%. What if HUD and other federal agencies worked with local agencies to come up with a neighborhood redevelopment plan? That's the Promise Zone program. That's the SC2, Strong Cities, Strong Communities, that the city of Chester participated in. For those of you who don't know, there is a draft notice out right now for comment until I think early June for the next round of Promise Zones that really expand what the first round did. Philadelphia was one of the first round winners, and I sure hope that others in Region 3 and in this room will look at the second round. That's my list of what-ifs.
If you wouldn't mind, indulge me in about a 15-second commercial. I want to introduce a colleague here with me today, somebody else from DCD. His name's Brad Carey. He's our new regional director. For many of you in the audience that are interested in DCD funding, he's a key first contact. Please stop by and see him. He is relatively new in the job, but I'm sure he'd like to get to meet you and know you about your programs. So I'll start with a quote. Housers tend to be very isolated. And if it was a smaller group and we had more time, I'd love to play a game of 20 questions and see if you could figure out who gave that quote. Suffice it to say, it's one of the smartest people I know. Feather Houston, somebody who's cut across so many different areas, not just housing, but welfare, education, transportation, finance. Real smart lady. Well, she was also on the 2000 Millennium Housing Commission, and in 2002, she delivered that quote. Unfortunately, Housers changed that reputation, receiving too much notoriety in the decade that followed, obviously all the wrong type. I think we could probably say in several ways we have either returned to that isolation or right now we're doing a real good job headed in that direction. In that same presentation, she spoke about the need and the potential for public entrepreneurship, specifically looking at states or referencing what states have done and could do, what the potential was that's there. I'd argue that Pennsylvania has already moved and must continue to move in a more entrepreneurial direction with new ideas and new approaches to our work. Some of the examples that are out there are the Act 90, the tools to address blight, conservatorship, and land banks. Also, it's important to continue that entrepreneurial approach in seeking new resources because I anticipate a lack of state funding due to fiscal pressures regardless of who wins in November. There's going to continue to be pressure with medical assistance, pension, and educational costs. All of these priorities will continue to push housing needs aside. I'd acknowledge Liz and the Alliance. They have great ideas on those alternative resource directions and is seeking things other than regular appropriations. She just did a great job in her What If sharing those ideas with you. Now for my contribution to the panel, I offer my big what if. What if we increasingly shift to data-driven approaches to our work? Some examples of how it's already occurring. DCD targeted our neighborhood stabilization, NSP investments into transitional or middle market neighborhoods rather than simply scatter them widely. The Reinvestment Fund, TRF, they've conducted research for HUD on the use of NSP funds and found a disproportionately higher share of targeted clusters in Pennsylvania compared to other states. CDBG disaster recovery, the funds helping us get back from the 2011 flooding. HUD is pushing us to examine data on disaster impacts and continue to review the unmet needs as we approve funding for our projects. So as we look to reallocate funds, we have to keep going back and looking at what are the unmet needs. We can't just simply change our allocation and say, well, we think it should be this. It's not the same old CDBG approach as to what you're used to. There's also some opportunities where I think we can expand on the use of data-driven approaches. Perhaps the best example would be return on investment measures that could show the impact of our work. Let's use projected data to consider applications and then go back and gather results afterwards to show impact. We certainly face some significant challenges in doing this. As a matter of fact, Feather Houston, who continues to write in insightful, thoughtful articles in governing, recently pointed out the challenge of studying the cost savings justification for government funding. She pointed out that it's really a challenge to break down the silos to count the results in different realms. We face that challenge here in what I'm proposing. As we spend funds for housing, we may reduce the cost of mental health care. If we spend funds on housing, we may reduce the demand and burden of TANF families on the service system. How do we capture and calculate those funds and that data, not only across the silos, but longitudinally as well, is truly a challenge. The bottom line, though, to my what if housers want to come out of their shell, they will need a story to tell.
All right, good afternoon. You guys are hopefully staying awake from lunch. Chris Estes with the National Housing Conference Center, National Housing Conference. I'm very pleased to be here with you all today from Washington, D.C. I have a couple of what ifs, and I'm going to ask you at the end, which one you think is the most likely to not be true. What if we had bipartisan consensus on housing reform and expansion of housing funding? What if we had bipartisan action in Congress to actually move housing reform forward? Or what if we had the affordable housing community working together as a movement, not as an industry? Of those three, the third one is not true. The first two are. And I'm here to tell you a little bit about that and hopefully come back to the third at the end. So 2 years ago, the Bipartisan Policy Center convened a housing commission which produced a report that actually is a bipartisan document that projects out what reform is needed for housing affordability and the housing market as a whole, and what are ways in which they recommend expansion in affordable housing. It's easy to miss because, as Liz pointed out, it's not a bill or a law, but it is a step in a direction that we have not seen in housing work, and particularly affordable housing focus, in quite some time, where there was real consensus about what the problems were and that we needed to do more and invest more. Something that I think all of us who are advocates have spent a lot of time talking about and wishing we could get policymakers to see. So the document is worth your while to check out if you've not seen it, even if it's just to learn where that consensus was and to think about how you can translate those talking points to your work as you talk to policymakers. Because people agreed that the housing finance system needed to be reformed. It was not sustainable in the current format under the way Fannie and Freddie both had operated prior to the crash and certainly coming out of the recovery as they are now in receivership. There was a goal to create a explicit government guarantee coming from a nonprofit without shareholders, so no moral hazard to sort of balance shareholder return versus mission and safety and soundness, to enable a clear path for private capital to enter the market, something that private capital is largely not participating in any mortgage lending on multifamily or single family, a clear path of how multifamily will be able to participate, and a commitment to access, accessibility, and duty to serve across the country. The second piece that I think is significant is that they agreed to make a significant expansion to the Section 8 rental housing program, basically saying that it ought to operate, although they were careful not to say the words entitlement program, it ought to operate like an entitlement, and that everybody who needs it should be able to get it. Something that we have not come close to in this country since the development of that program. And roughly 1 out of every 4 people who would likely be eligible being able to access a voucher, a number that I think is probably continuing to climb as voucher funding has not increased. And in return for in shifting all the resources towards to Section 8, it ought to serve only folks at 30% and below area median income. In other words, we will make the guarantee to serve the most vulnerable of our population, which again, as a bipartisan statement, and I should add, this commission was led by a former Republican leader of the Senate and a former Democratic leader of the Senate, and then two chairmen, two former HUD secretaries, Mel Martinez and who's the other one? Is going to escape my brain in a second. Henry Cisneros, thank you. I just had a brain cramp there. So I think that alone should give us some hope that people who live and breathe this stuff and have obviously been heavily engaged in partisan politics, along with a wide-ranging group of folks, came together to agree on these consensus points. The second what if is that there is a real opportunity for housing reform, the mortgage finance system reform, to happen right now, and something that you should be engaged in and talking to your legislators about. Because like any reform, there's a lot of pushback from entrenched interests who don't want to see change happen. And these are particularly coming from large hedge funds who have invested heavily in Fannie and Freddie stock when it was worthless after they were taken over, and they very much want to see Fannie and Freddie spun back out so their stock will go up and they will reap significant windfall. This bill is literally happening right now. It was supposed to come out for markup today, and I was just told a short while ago that they have postponed markup to allow for more amendments to be proposed to the bill prior to its release. But this is the one area in Washington where there actually is bipartisan collaboration and work. And so we should really take advantage of it. Housing is in the spotlight, something we're not particularly used to, and we should use that opportunity. It's a chance to talk to your senators and House members about the needs and opportunities that you see in the state and how we need a better finance system that's going to function for the whole spectrum of housing, something that we're not currently seeing. And then finally, the comment about housing as a movement is one that I try to take in every speech I give in every part of the country I go to. And this comes out of my own bias that too often I hear people use the words affordable housing industry. I hear it all the time within folks who work in the tax credit side of the affordable housing spectrum. We're an industry, the housing industry. Well, everything we do and everything we're advocating for is a public investment, a public subsidy or an intervention by the government in the housing market where housing isn't working well for people with low and moderate incomes, or for people we want to see access home ownership, or for people we want to see get out of homelessness. That's a mission-driven cause. We can't frame ourselves as an industry and be worthy of that level of support. Industries are self-serving. They have huge amounts of campaign cash they spend to sort of buy their favor, but they're not particularly getting by on the merits of their argument because it's best for the country or best for the community. We have the advantage of incredible stories to tell of change and benefit, not just to single families, but entire communities. Impacts that inhibit beyond just housing, but health and education, economic opportunity, things that benefit everyone, even for folks who aren't receiving that benefit. And so my final sort of plea to everybody is think of ourselves as a community that is part of a movement. We don't have to say the word movement, but we shouldn't be saying the word industry. And the reason is, more importantly, is all of us have to see that we have a role in that. Whether you're a realtor who's interested in access to home ownership, or somebody who's trying to end homelessness, all of us, or a for-profit developer that builds tax credit multifamily development, or a lender who syndicates or buys credits or makes loans for construction, all of us are a part of that spectrum. And if we were, as Liz, I think, led off with, if we were all using our voices in a collective way, we would have such more power than we have now to bring about the changes we know we need. We have sort of allowed our message to be too diffuse and too isolated. And now is the time that we have these sort of broad bipartisan opportunities to make a difference to me, it's sort of the rallying cry of changing the frame in which people think about housing, and particularly think about housing affordability.
Thank you all very much. 4 very good presentations, short, concise, to the point, and there's a lot of information. Do any of you have questions for each other on points that were made? Put you on the spot with that one, didn't I?
I have a question for Jane. Can you all hear me?
No.
Consider yourself lucky. I have a question. I got a call the other day from someone from the health department who had figured out that some large percentage of the children that they were seeing had lead poisoning or asthma that was related to the housing situation that they were in. Is there any initiative to try and address healthier housing, or to get to Ed's point, to get to the connection between children's well-being and the housing situation? The same is probably true of education, but what's going on with that? What's the national thinking?
For those of you who have heard HUD talk about in the last few years, housing is a platform for health. That is something we have been talking about. When I talked about what if your zip code didn't matter, that's the same issue. We know that folks who live in areas of distress have more health needs, more education needs long term. I didn't quite get it when I first came to HUD, and many of you know I've been in the industry for a lot of years, but my field office director in Baltimore is a nurse by training, and boy, if she hasn't drummed that into my head, I can't tell you. And it's not just the children, it's seniors. I mean, she brings up to me last summer a particular housing authority in her area, the senior high-rise air conditioning was out. Well, I got to tell you, that was a health issue for the seniors in that building. So there are lots of health issues. I would say that we hope that housing authorities are looking at it. We hope that municipalities are looking at it. The Better Buildings Challenge is another way to look at it. There are lead support programs for different cities. So there are things that are going on in that area, but much more to be done. When I mentioned about the mobility counseling efforts that we've talked about, indeed, that's an effort to take a look at how we can encourage families to think a little more broadly. It would get them, in some cases, into a healthier environment, which would be better for the long term. It's a very general answer, but there are lots of things going on, and it's not just going to be a federal government initiative. I think some of it is education, and there's been some education of tenants going on as well.
Anyone else like to jump in on that topic? Any other questions?
Well, I think maybe I'll sort of jump in, and I think this might have been something that Ed ended it with, and Chris talked about it in terms of advocacy, and I already know that Liz knows this. But when you talk about, we have a story to tell. When you talk about maybe kids who are living in unhealthy conditions, and just advocacy in general, again, I didn't quite believe it for a lot of years, but trying to make what you all do each and every day and the people that you work with and work for, make that into a real life story that can connect with others. That's how we become a movement, not an industry. I spent a few years at a community foundation, and it was there that I learned how to tell stories. Just last week, I've been around the region talking about fair housing, and the stories I tell in fair housing, come on, we're part of an industry or a movement. All of you understand fair housing issues, but do you know the story of the woman who in a wheelchair who was housebound, indeed a prisoner in her public housing unit because the housing authority didn't think it was important to move her into a place where she could go in and out of her doors and had to be carried in and out of her house? Or would you believe that a property manager in the state of Virginia would say, no, we're not going to accept anyone who needs a translator because they speak Spanish in an area growing Hispanic population, that no, we're not going to have those Spanish-speaking people here? Would you believe that a property manager would say, no, folks from that culture can't live here because their cooking smells too bad? So I can resonate with stories in a way that I said, we have a fair housing law and we have protected classes and we all know that's the right thing to do. But if I talk to you about a story, you all get it. Or folks who maybe don't get the law maybe have a better understanding. The issue we're having in the NBA right now is a story to be told. And I think it's the stories that will turn us into a movement.
I just wanted to build off something Jane said, which I think is important. We have both a kind of challenge and opportunity in front of us. The challenge is that in a fiscally constrained environment, everything is under increased scrutiny. And I think particularly when folks were looking at tax reform, which I think will come eventually, but is sort of put on hold for a little while, the question of how we justify, say, the cost per unit of developments built with the low-income housing tax credit was something a lot of people were talking about. And what became really evident to me was if you just sort of talk about, again, housing as just the structure, it becomes difficult sometimes to justify all the costs of those of building units versus what the private market can do, and just having a voucher. But when you talk about housing as a platform for service delivery in protecting some of our most vulnerable populations and having real success in outcomes, it really becomes a very different story to tell. And so I think the advantage we have is that housing is so inexorably connected to all the issues that are so important for the public and for policymakers. I used to, whenever I gave a speech, I had this graphic that showed housing as the hub of a wheel in which all these other issues were around the outside. And in the local media or state media, we would spend much more time thinking about education or public health or seniors or transportation or economic development, but we never really understood how important quality, affordable housing was to all of those things, and that none of them were going to be successful without it. And so we now have the opportunity, there's more and more research. We've really, at the National Housing Conference, focused on trying to be a resource for folks to be able to tell that story and make those connections. And now we have a different way to frame the work we're doing, whether it's intervening to help folks in housing counseling to become a successful homeowner and what that means for their economic opportunity, or what it means to have children living in housing that's not making them sick. We did a study in North Carolina that showed that the state spent $96 million a year on the healthcare costs to children who lived in substandard housing. That wasn't lost time from work from their parents or any other economic factors. It was just that component, just to force a discussion about affordable housing as a public health issue, because so much attention has been about insurance and access to insurance that I kept saying, well, what good does insurance do if the place they go home to and spend 8 or 10 hours every day makes them sick? And we have to invest in housing as well. So that we now have more research about the linkage between quality, affordable housing and education, and the cost dynamics as you put housing closer to transit and transportation centers, so that the cost of living in a place isn't just the mortgage or the rent, it's also the utilities and the transportation costs. So we have a much richer and much more dynamic story to tell, and in some ways a bigger and more bridges to build with all the folks who are thinking about, we know far more about health and energy efficiency and education than those fields know about housing. And it's our job to sort of broaden that net and tell that story. And that's really, I think, the tremendous potential we have. We have so many more non-traditional allies to bring in with us to our movement to help change the way policymakers think about the investments that we need. That I hope you can feel excited about that, because I don't want us, we've been playing defense for so long, it's hard to think that, oh, there's actually opportunities to change the way people are thinking about this as a funding priority. And I really think this is our moment to do that.
Thank you. I think those who set up this program and selected, I'm sorry, have another.
Hold on, 'cause I'm gonna mess with the time. Can I have 2 minutes?
Go ahead.
I wanted to acknowledge Craig Zumbrun and George Klaus for their leadership. They are old friends and former board members of the Housing Alliance, and I know that many of you were involved in today's summit, but I also know that without the tenacity of George and Craig, that this event would never have happened, and it is the only event of its type taking place in the state of Pennsylvania this year. And I just want to acknowledge you and thank you for your leadership.
I think you've sufficiently embarrassed them. And of course, they did do a lot of work on it, and we all do appreciate that. I think that, though, that the work that they did in setting up this panel and the ideas of how it should work and could work came true. And I think that the program we have just seen was very useful, very helpful, and I want to thank all the presenters and all the work that they did.
Hi, my name's Gail D'Angelo. I'm the Community Reinvestment Act Officer at M&T Bank. I cover the Pennsylvania region. Wherever M&T Bank has a footprint, that's where I cover. My job is to make sure that the bank is giving back to the communities where we do business, especially targeting the individuals who have low or moderate income or in places where there is low or moderate income. Today's sponsorship was important to us because we believe in what the South Central Assembly is doing. We think that it's important to grow the economies of scale throughout all of the communities so that we can create a more effective and economically run government.
Let me begin by introducing myself. My name is Steve Snell. I am the president of the board of the South Central Assembly. And for the rest of the week, I am the executive officer of the Realtors Association of York and Adams Counties, one of the sponsors tonight. Those of us who planned the session today believed that one of the highlights would be the Battle of the Mayors. No, I didn't mean that. Discussion of urban housing issues with our 4 city mayors. And we thought that that would be enough, maybe along with the wine and cheese after this, to keep people till the end of the day. And it looks like it's worked reasonably well.
The wine.
Yeah, no, I'm going to say it's the panel. I think we all know that cities have their challenges. We have in our urban cores the oldest housing stock. It houses a disproportionate amount of our low-income population. It has a very disproportionate percentage of our nonprofits that don't pay taxes to the cities. So they're challenged. And we're anxious to hear how the mayors of our 4 cities address those challenges when it comes to housing. Since we only have an hour, actually 50 minutes, for these 4 urban leaders, I'm going to make their introductions short. They are written in the program with a lot more detail, but you all know them. All you have to do is turn on your TV set and you'll see one of the 4 on a regular basis. What we're most concerned about is what they see as the challenges and potential solutions for their urban areas. So I'm going to introduce them all at once, and then after they've all had a chance to address both of those issues, then we'll talk about some opportunities for question and answer. Let me begin with our host city mayor, Kim Bracey. Kim Bracey. Kim is beginning her second term as mayor of the city of York. She is a born and bred Yorker who previously served as the director of the Department of Community Development, and before that she served the nation as a member of the U.S. Air Force. I've been an acquaintance, friend of Kim for at least the last 10 years. We've served on some things together. Next, Mayor Rick Gray of Lancaster, who was recently elected to his third term, having begun in January of 2006. Prior to his election, he was a member of the Lancaster County Bar Association for 30 years, and that included serving as its president. He has been viewed, and I even heard it at one of our breakout sessions today, as not only being innovative, but as much green as he is gray.
So they want to eat the wrong.
And Rick and I go back at least 30 years. I did make the move from Lancaster to, as I told him earlier, the occupied West Bank over here in York. Sherry Capello of Lebanon has begun her second term as mayor. She has had prior professional municipal experience in both the township and borough levels, which should add a unique perspective to her comments. And last but not least is the newest member of the pack here, and that is Eric Papenfuss, mayor of Harrisburg, who just began office in January of this year. His background as a small business owner in that city gives him a unique perspective as well. And although his tenure is short, if the media is reporting correctly, he's already had some noteworthy housing-related challenges. So with that, I'm going to ask Mayor Bracey if she would begin, and if you would, give us a sense of what you see as the primary housing challenges in the city of York and what your administration may have planned to help address those.
Sure, thank you. You want to sit there?
You can sit there, that's fine, as long as people can hear and see
Can you
it.
hear me? And don't see me?
Maybe they can't see you. You want to sit here? There you go. Stand.
Okay, so you made me stand. Thank you, Steve. Good to see everyone today. Thank you for being here. A great crowd on a nice rainy day. It's better than it being sunny and you in here for sure. So I'm glad I'm able to be here in front of you and with you. We've seen, some of the challenges Steve already mentioned, we see across the Commonwealth, and particularly our older communities, are what we see here in the city of York. An older housing stock, housing that was developed for a working class group of people, if you will, with many, many codes issues, much blight, much dilapidation as well. And then we also have a lot of historic preservation coupled with all of that. So our challenges have been to work within those confines, if you will, and try to address each one of them while providing decent, affordable, market rate, in many cases, housing for our large, very diverse demographic of individuals. Our administration has took a bold stance with addressing blight, everything from instant citations being given to property owners for any number of property maintenance issues, to really working closely with our our city redevelopment authority and acquisition of properties, and then ultimate, in some cases, demolition or reuse. We have a number of different, again, variety of housing that has come online, if you will, for different backgrounds. Because of this as well, too, the redevelopment has acted as an intercessory to maybe facilitate a lot of development we've seen in housing. So our challenge of lately, what I'm hearing out there, are people needing market rate housing in our community, good apartment type style living, if you will, in particularly our downtown and our walkable communities. And I find it to be a bit of a challenge, namely because of funding, or the lack of funding, in the area to really help develop that and spur that along. So we work closely with developers, again, as well as our redevelopment authority to bring many of those online. A host of other things that will probably tie into that. So that's my first answer. Okay, great. Thank you.
Rick, I don't know whether you want to sit there or when you come up to the podium, whatever you're most comfortable with. I think many of us in the region have kind of looked at Lancaster and say, they might be just a little ahead of the curve compared to the rest of the area. So with that, I hope you've got all the answers.
So do we.
I do, but I'm not going to share them.
He never tells me anything.
You know, it was recently. What was that? Show a little respect to your elders here. Recently, a study was done by the Lancaster Housing Opportunities Program, is it right? Or partnership, of the housing in the city and the county of Lancaster, and came up with some interesting conclusions and also some interesting facts and figures. One of them is that the population of the city of Lancaster, about 50%, is what would be termed young singles or young married couples. And it's projected in the next 5 years that that is going to continue to grow. Similarly, a sizable percentage, though not as big as the rest of the county, are baby boomers and empty nesters who are moving into the city. Right now, what we see in Lancaster is really high-end apartments and condominiums going in. We have about a block from City Hall, there is a condo unit that has 14 units, a condo building that they're building. 12 of them were sold before they broke ground. They're selling for between $400,000 and $700,000. People want to move into downtown, and what it's all about is a walkable urbanity. People don't want to be car dependent anymore. They want to move in to a place where they can walk. I live in downtown Lancaster. I can walk to 30 restaurants from my house. So there's that kind of pressure. Couple that with this. 98% of the apartment units in the city of Lancaster are occupied. There's about a 2% vacancy rate right now. 56% of the households in Lancaster are in apartments. Well, when you have that kind of demand, and you have people who want to move in, and also people for economic reasons want to live in the city. It's the cheapest place in certain sense to live in the county. What you end up with is landlords and who will invest by buying a property, but they won't maintain it because you can get over what it's worth right now by not doing anything. Why should you do something and be able to raise the rent or accommodate people? You can just sort of maintain it, just keep it from falling down, and you're going to be able to rent it right now. So that's a problem. That's a problem dealing with those people. Now, I'm not talking about all landlords like they're bad. There's a half a dozen in the city that I'd march them to the Susquehanna and throw them off the bridge. But most of the landlords in the city are not slumlords. Yet on the other hand, you got small investors that own 2 and 3 properties. They're getting what I've been told. I asked our director of public housing the other day, how much would not a real fancy, but a nice 2-bedroom apartment in a nice section of town cost? And he said $1,000 a month. For subsidized housing, they pay $800 a month for a 2-bedroom rental unit. That to me really shocked me, because that just seems like an awful lot of money for a community where the average family income, the median family income, is $32,000 a year. Ray in his study pointed out that if you take 35%, I think it is it 30 or 35%, Ray, that if you go over it for your rent, you're spending too much on your rent. Well, in the city, a sizable percentage of people, I have the figure here somewhere, go over that. Yet on the other hand, if you include transportation costs in the city, about 9% of the people are more than 45% of their income with household, with the rental or purchasing a property and transportation. Only about 9% are over that 45% level. Whereas in the county, 70% are over the 45% level. In the city, only, I think it's around 70% in that neighborhood, 70% of the people own one car or no car at all. I'm happy to say my wife and I are in that category. We own one car. Now we own 11 motorcycles, but only one car. But when you combine the housing costs and the transportation costs, the city drops to 9% of the people that are over 45% of their income, where the county is 70%. Well, what does that say? That says that there's opportunities again for walkable urbanity in the city. It's cheaper to live in the city. Urbanists, new urbanists project that one vehicle, one car, will allow you, if you get rid of it, will allow you to finance between $100,000 and $125,000 additional on a home. Get rid of two cars, you can double it. So what we want to do, we want to make the city more conducive, one, to people who want to invest in the city, that want to clean up the city, who want to make living conditions properly. And we have our one of the people here who's primarily responsible for code enforcement and our housing enforcement. We inspect. You have to register a rental property and you have to have it inspected. You have to have it licensed. You register it once, you have to have it licensed. We have now gotten through our first wave of inspecting what we now believe is every rental property in the city of Lancaster and asking to be brought up to code, and we're starting again. Now we'll still go in and inspect if there's a complaint, but you're on a list, and at least once every 4 years a rental property is going to be inspected. What can we do in the future? Well, again, the future projection is more young singles, more young couples moving into the city. We need affordable housing. If we don't have affordable housing, what we will do is basically lose in the economic race. People will not come and will not want to locate in the city, businesses in the city. So a couple of things we've talked about, and that Ray's entity recommends some of these, and some of these are my own. Upper story development. I think you probably have the same thing in York and Lebanon and Harrisburg. Second floors, some stuff. Look up to the third and fourth floor of these older buildings, they're empty. We should facilitate development of that as much as possible. We recently passed a new zoning law. We have an overlay you can put in, and I can't remember the number of square feet, but it's, I don't know, I'm guessing 600. Do you know, Ray, what it is with the smaller apartment units that you can put 600 square feet? With higher end finishes, we don't want rooming houses as such, but again, for the kid that's living in the college dorm that comes out that owes the money for college loans and whatnot, provide a place, new apartments that are small, that compared to the college dorm are roomy. We're going to be looking at that, and we are doing that. Better transit connections. I would love a streetcar in the city of Lancaster, and I haven't given up on it. If we had a streetcar system back in the city of Lancaster, you could make the entire city walkable. People would use it, and really, if you've ever been in Portland, Oregon, on the streetcar line is, with every ad for a house or an apartment, on the streetcar line signifies something, signifies value, signifies economic development. We have the city revitalization and improvement zone that we're currently implementing. It's a new state program that allows us to use increased state tax revenue to develop the city. As a condition of getting that, I want some commitment from people who would be receiving that money that they're going to employ people that live in the city. Again, a walkable urbanity. I've walked to work for 42 years. I meet my wife for lunch every day. Everything old is new again. We want job opportunities close to where people can get to them. Employer assistant housing, Lancaster General Hospital, how many, Ray? Do you know that they've, well over 100, I don't. When you go door to door around Lancaster General Hospital, you knock on the door, 1 out of 3 of the people work at the hospital. Why? The hospital gives, I think it was $10,000 at one time, if you buy a house within a walking distance to the hospital. They'll give you, if you own a house, they would give you like $5,000 for improvements if you work at the hospital. We want to, also F&M did the same thing, not as generous. We want to encourage more employers to do that, to have people have a proximity to their work so they can get to work without the necessity of using a car or a bus or hopefully a streetcar. 1 or 2 other things, mixed income development. Don't make it $500,000 condos or else subsidize. Of course, all housing is subsidized. I love it. I had a friend the other day who lives in the suburbs tell me, well, yeah, you have all that subsidized housing. I said, well, you live in subsidized housing. What do you mean? I own my house. Do you deduct your mortgage interest? Yeah, well, I pay taxes, so you can deduct your mortgage interest. That's every bit, if not more, subsidized. Where's the renter deducting mortgage interest? The person that rents an apartment doesn't deduct that, but the person that buys a house in the suburbs does. Anyway, I'll get off that soapbox. Sorry, I get my dander up from time to time. Mixed income development. We have one area left in the city where we're developing or trying to develop some housing. It'll be mixed income. It'll be everything from $300,000 for houses to moderately priced workforce housing rental units. And one final thing, it was also suggested by LHOP's study, a land bank. Every now and then we have a piece of property that opens up that really should be owned and held by someone or some entity that's interested in the public interest and not just profits. Just to grab it, hold on to it for the time being. Keep it there until someone comes along who's willing to develop it in a positive way. I can think of a half a dozen different properties that came for sale and went and were sold and are really not being put to their best use at this point, that if we had a land bank like that, we could do it in Lancaster. So those are some of the ideas we're talking about for the future. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Well, just to give you a little background on Lebanon City, we have a population of slightly over 25,000. So out of all the mayors here, I have one of the smaller cities compared to them. We have more than 11,000 housing units, and out of those total housing units, we have 920 vacancies. About 90 of those are condemned. Our owner-occupied percentage is 46% compared to renter-occupied at 54%. Just 10 years prior to the last census, that split was 50-50, so we're going in the wrong direction. Additionally, our median household income is about $34,000 compared to around $52,000 for the state. About 28% of our residents are below poverty level compared to almost 23% in the 2010 census and not quite 15% in the 2000 census, so that's quite scary as well. Many of the regions of the state are either experiencing rapid growth or severe economic decline. And in our city, a lot of our housing stock has become older, of course, and increasingly affordable housing means old, dilapidated stock. Our state has one of the highest foreclosure rates in the nation, but we create new housing on new land at one of the fastest rates in the nation, yet we're the third slowest growing in the nation. So our most affordable housing is located in our communities with some of the highest property tax burdens. We also are home to more elderly than most states in the nation, and an increasing number have some type of disability. So to briefly summarize what Lebanon City's challenges are, we need to, of course, flip our owner-occupied versus renter-occupied numbers in the city. Our goal is 60-40. And given their greater financial stake and longer expected tenure, homeowners are expected to take better care of their homes and become more involved in local organizations and activities aimed at improving their neighborhoods. We need to empower our residents, including our transient population, to believe in community and to help take care of their neighborhoods one block at a time. Our median household income is too low. I mentioned earlier that 28% of our families are below poverty level. Additionally, the percentage of families below poverty level that have a female head of household is just about 60%. We need to create better family sustaining jobs, help our single working mothers, and be aware of our ever-changing workforce needs so that the employers in our region have access to the exact type of employee they need to grow and succeed. A property maintenance code is an instrument, of course, used by locals to improve the condition of properties that have fallen into disrepair. As I stated earlier, our housing stock continues to grow older, and while we have many older buildings with attractive architectural features, we also have a lot of older housing stock wherein the buildings just have not been properly taken care of, and they're dilapidated, including some buildings that have been allowed to sit vacant for decades, and that has deteriorated them at an even faster pace. While we're fortunate that we possess less than 1% blighted properties on the rolls, it is too much in my book. Lebanon started to enforce the International Property Maintenance Code in 1998, utilizing 4 volunteers from the community. That program was and continues to operate out of the Department of Public Safety, and the Fire Commissioner oversees the program. Unfortunately, most of his time is devoted to fighting fires and to fire prevention, so he doesn't have the time I believe is necessary to really run an efficient program. Until 5 years ago, the Fire Commissioner had a deputy who focused on property maintenance enforcement, but due to budget cuts, that position was eliminated prior to my taking office. I have not been able to reinstate that position. The program did change in 2004, however, from utilizing volunteers to utilizing 5 people who are employed by the city. They're also part-time, however. This helped provide better control of the program rather than using volunteers. However, we still need more time on the street, more streamlining and efficiencies for the number of employees we have, and we need to adopt tougher policies for slumlords. Another challenge is we need to close the affordability gap. There's a shortage of homes available and affordable to low-income families. The private sector cannot address the shortage. It simply costs more to build a modest home than a low-wage worker or person on a fixed income can afford. Affordable housing units that are safe, decent, and handicapped accessible for the elderly and persons with disabilities as well are needed. According to Urban Institute, for every 100 extremely low-income renter households in the city, in Lebanon County, there are only 21 affordable and available rental units. The city has found multiple families residing together in apartments, representing an overcrowding situation because they cannot find affordable, safe, and decent housing. That's far from an ideal living arrangement, and some of these situations actually violate our ordinances. The Lebanon County Housing Authority has families on Section 8 waiting lists since 2011 that are only getting placed in homes in 2014. So how are we attacking these challenges? Well, regarding the owner versus renter occupied numbers, the Lebanon County Redevelopment Authority, who is an excellent partner with the city, Betsy Bowman is sitting right there. Betsy, if you want to give a wave, great partnership with them. We've increased our marketing efforts of our first-time homebuyer program and our rehab program, which use, of course, CDBG and home funds. Over the last 6 years with our partner, we've assisted 71 first-time homebuyers with down payments. And we noticed a huge decrease in first-time homebuyer applications since that first-time homebuyer tax credit of $8,000 ended in April of 2010. It would be helpful if we could get that reinstated. It also would be helpful if we could get our funding levels restored to what they were several years ago. We were awarded $1.5 million in Neighborhood Stabilization Program monies in 2009, and with the authority, we were able to purchase, rehab, and convert many multiple family dwellings into single family dwellings. We also land banked some properties for a future redevelopment program, and we were able to give Habitat for Humanity 3 properties that they rehabbed for low-income single families. Unfortunately, we were not successful in our last application for this funding, so now this program for now is pretty much completed. We also supported an application by the WOTA Group to Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency for Penn Home Funds and low-interest tax credits to help finance the renovation and reuse of a 6-story former manufacturing building for 50 1- and 2-bedroom affordable rental housing units for seniors. The city rezoned the property to allow the residential use, and we obtained support from our county for a loan from the county's affordable housing fund so that local support could be shown for that project. That was approved in February and is proposed to break ground this fall. So that's an exciting project for our seniors. The county also established an age wave initiative. The committee has begun to address the changing demographics with the baby boomers aging and what different and additional services, including housing, are going to be needed in the next 20 years. A Lebanon County Coalition to End Homelessness was established a couple years ago, and Lebanon County Christian Ministries and Jubilee Ministries joined together to provide an emergency shelter in the city for the homeless and to provide resources to help them find jobs and permanent housing. During the first year of the shelter, they took care of 160 individuals and found permanent housing for 155. They just ended their second season yesterday and served 138 individuals this past season. We also implemented an incentive to homeowners of single-family dwellings. Owner-occupied applications receive a 10% discount on their city zoning and building permit fees. Regarding the lower than average medium household income and the need for better family sustaining jobs, the city's Elm Street manager held a job fair last October. 7 employers were in attendance and 160 job seekers. It was our most successful job fair yet. 40% of those in attendance were from our poorest neighborhood. We're going to hold another job fair this year as well. We're also hosting financial planning and budgeting workshops in both English and Spanish. We also partnered with our school district to hold a language partnership program to help our non-English speaking residents learn English. The Lebanon Valley Economic Development Corporation, the Chamber, HAC, and the Lebanon County Vocational School are all interested in workforce development, and I serve on a committee to address workforce development issues. At a recent forum, we recognized the need to reach the students and their parents earlier in the educational years, prior to the age where the students make a decision on whether or not they're going to continue higher education. They need to know what the employers in our region needs are so that they can make informed decisions on their future. The group also recognized the need to enhance communication and formally establish relationships with the employers in order to better determine their short-term and long-term employee needs. Lebanon is also receiving a grant to complete an early intervention plan phase 3, which will focus mainly on economic development, community development, zoning, and downtown development efforts for the city. As Mayor Gray said, we also need to look at those upper floor development and issues with building codes and things like that. Regarding the property maintenance program, we implemented a pilot program this March wherein our full-time zoning officer, who operates actually out of the Public Works Department, has moved over to public safety to oversee the property maintenance program on a daily basis. By having only part-time inspectors and the fire commissioner out fighting fires, we needed more guidance to the part-time employees and to assist with streamlining those services and complaints. We're also working on making one of the part-time inspectors full-time if our CDBG money holds out. We also had a rental license program established since 2007, and with having someone devoting more time to the rental and property maintenance programs, we've realized that not all of the regulations on the books were being enforced. So now we're holding the issuance of rental license renewals to landlords who have outstanding fees and violations with the department. Regarding the notices of violations, we're also shortening the amount of time for compliance when documentation shows that the landlord was previously notified of the requirement. And because our CDBG funding has been cut so hard, we have less money to fight blight. We used to use CDBG funds to purchase blighted buildings. Recently, however, we petitioned the Court of Common Pleas to force 2 property owners to demolish their own blighted buildings. We're currently in the court process, so I don't have a final outcome on that. And these 2 particular buildings had no historic value, no beautiful architectural features. They were just simply quite ugly. We utilize many fight blight tools. However, we'll be reviewing our policies and ordinances to make sure that we're utilizing all of the tools available to us. And again, addressing the last challenge regarding the affordability gap, the higher levels of government really need to dedicate funding to assist in solving this problem. Again, in partnership with the Redevelopment Authority, we purchased and demolished a blighted manufacturing building with CDBG monies. Then we used additional CDBG funding, Act 137 loan, Penn Homes, and low interest tax credit.
Sherry just mentioned having demolition paid for by the property owner. And I've heard in Lancaster about how expensive it is to demolish a home. Our next speaker has figured out how to up the ante and tackle churches. So I don't know whether...
Well, we better get right to it. I know. Whew. All right. I'll tell you about the church. But first, an amusing story about Mayor Gray, which I think is appropriate given that I am the most junior mayor here. And Mayor Gray extended a tremendous opportunity to me when I was first elected. And I've only been in office about 100 days. He invited me up to Lancaster to basically shadow him for a day and see what it would be like to be mayor, which was really extraordinary. And I drove up, and I remember his office lined with books, which I could appreciate very much. I sort of sat quietly on the sofa in the corner, and I just watched this sort of parade of department heads coming in one after the other, discussing economic development, discussing other issues, and then they would quietly leave, and then there was time for, I think, a couple important phone calls, and then messages would go back and forth, and boy, I mean, everything was moving like clockwork. And then there was time for this walking tour of Lancaster. I got to see all of these new urbanists in action. The cranes were everywhere. We went to the market and toured that. It was thriving. Had a wonderful lunch with the First Lady, which was very impressive. And I led myself to believe maybe I would actually be able to have lunch with my wife on a regular basis. And then I came back, conducted some more business, and went back to Harrisburg. And I tell you, I was so inspired. This was the way. And it was a beautiful historic city hall. Although there was renovations, everything seemed incredibly organized and ready to go. And I remember on my first day, the roof of our public safety building finally gave way, collapsing everywhere. There was water, and every basic. There were entire rooms of files that had just been deserted and abandoned for decades, room after room after room. And the Human Resource Department was literally had buckets because the roof was leaking in there. The solicitor's office, all the records were sopping wet. This was in the midst of it all. And I didn't let that deter me. And basically, on a regular basis, I have learned that my days have just been a sort of series of crisis management. And I've gotten to the point where I have to schedule I have to schedule time to think and to plan big issues, and it's been nonstop. But my ideal remains the Lancaster model, which I saw, and I think it's going to take years to get there. But that was an amazing goal to set for myself. I, of course, declared a war on blight. This was one of my signature campaign promises, and I have to say, when I declared it running for office, it was incredibly popular. Talking about warrant sweeps and raising the ante whenever possible to misdemeanor charges such as reckless endangerment or failure to prevent a catastrophe. That we would have active codes enforcement, that they would be out there paying attention. And by golly, within the first time in office, the first building to collapse turns out to be a church that is owned by the head of the ministerium, and who unfortunately had many outstanding warrants, had failed to do anything to prevent this catastrophe. We arrested him, and he was sort of the poster child for this war on blight. And then of course we were sued. And on the same day that we were sued by the minister, we were also sued by the largest developer in town, who had the opposite opinion. We had told him that he had to take down a condemned property which he owned, and he was complaining that we hadn't condemned the neighboring properties, which were fully inhabited by homeowners as well. So we were, on the one hand, too soft, in enforcing the law in the one case, and too hard on the other. And all of that is just to say that getting tough on blight, which is really, I think, at the core of any housing strategy, especially an urban housing strategy, especially when you're dealing with older housing stock like in Harrisburg, is a major change. We took our codes department and we placed it inside public safety. I don't know how it's organized everywhere else, but this was a major change for Harrisburg, and we did that in part to have better communication and better enforcement powers between the police department and the codes department. And I will say, after the church collapsed, we also published a list of our top offenders, let's say, and many of them did come in and satisfy their warrants and pay their fines, which was that's the way it should be, a very, very positive thing. And today, we announced the formation of a housing court for Harrisburg, which I think is going to pay tremendous dividends. Our real problem in Harrisburg has been that depending on which district justice you go to, some district justices take blight very seriously, others do not. So they might dismiss a whole series of citations, they might have a little small fine, you might have to go back again and again and again. They may not pass it along through the system very, very quickly. Well, we've worked with the county behind the scenes, and we've actually moved it to a citywide county-run housing court with a district justice not connected to the local community. And of course, you can imagine that has caused some pushback on the part of the district justices, but I think very, very necessary and very important. Nobody is going to want to go to housing court. Housing court fines and the efficiency of the housing court it's going to both relieve the backlog of a lot of the cases that we have in our district justice system, but it's also going to make uniform the penalties, and it's going to make it just a much more efficient process. So that was announced today, and we're on our way to that. That's sort of on the enforcement side for our plan. We also have really, for the first time, begun developing for the first time in recent years, developing a housing strategy for the city of Harrisburg. We have 346 condemned properties in the city of Harrisburg. That's condemned properties in the city of Harrisburg. At least a third of those are in imminent danger of collapsing and are on a demolition list, and it's just a question of how can we get to them. And some of the others can be rehabbed, maybe not, but the bottom line is we have far more condemned properties than the city alone can afford to renovate. So the crux of our housing strategy is how can we deploy our CDBG dollars in a way that has the greatest impact. And instead of just cleaning up the buildings as they collapse, how can we basically map the city and come up with a means of taking some of these neighborhoods that are on the mend, on the comeback. Basically, we divided the city up into census tracts. we created a sort of calculation, a formula based on home value, subtracting a vacancy rate and a rental property rate, and a variety of other calculations. And then we narrowed those census tracts down by actual city streets to make it a little. But the bottom line is we determined the specific areas and neighborhoods within Harrisburg where we felt if we deployed our limited resources wisely and most strategically, we could make the biggest difference, have a real impact. And that's sort of how we're approaching things in an era in which resources are limited. And Mayor Gray also mentioned a land bank. We intend to move for a land bank here in the city in the next month or so, in conjunction with our redevelopment authority, which has really been looking for that type of leadership and that type of strategy, and hasn't had it for a while. Our policy has just been to accumulate a large number of properties, and the question is, how can we, especially in those transitional areas, accumulate enough properties to put them in the hands of individuals that will go out there and create new housing stock and make the type of investment that we want to see. So housing strategy, housing court, a war on blight, a reorganization of codes, and a long-term goal to get to that Lancaster model. But that's some of what we've been doing in our first few months.
I have a couple of questions to start us off, but in both cases, I'm not asking it go down the line, that each of you address it. But Rick, you had mentioned, and I think a couple of others did too, but in Lancaster, the new urbanism seems to have caught some traction. And I think that at least many of us have heard the concept for well over a decade, just waiting for it to come home to central Pennsylvania. But yet, I know the members of the Realtors Association still find potential home buyers saying, okay, I need to address the tax issue. There's the perception of crime. There's the perception of the education available. So how do you as city mayors address those particular issues, which I know in some cases are perception more than reality?
Well, first of all, we try to ignore them, but nah, seriously, property taxes, to say someone owns a piece of property and therefore has the ability to pay for police, fire, public works, schools, and county government is foolishness. It's okay for a bottom tax. A tax might be okay just to finance municipal government, but throw in schools and it kills us. My guess is every one of our communities has the highest tax in the county. Is that highest property tax? That's a problem. It's a problem and it stifles development. When you're competing with a business, unfortunately, because of property tax, we compete with other municipalities. Why? Well, if you build it on the north side of Liberty Street, we don't get anything because it's all property taxes. You build it on the south side of Liberty Street, you're in the city. We get everything. Well, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's like the Cypriots were recently going to tax the money you had in a savings account. Everybody said, well, that's foolish. It's no more foolish than property taxes. I mean, you have to have them. They're a good base tax, but they're no good to fund everything the way we try to do at the municipal level. So what's the answer? Number one, the property tax is reform. And, well, be it Senate Bill 76. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but it's a good start. I've been saying for years, what we have to do is say, we're not going to use property taxes to fund schools and see where it leads. And it might lead that we'll use some property taxes to fund schools. But start off with that. That one. Two, the perception of crime. I don't know how it is in the other communities, but our crime rate is flat or down. A friend of mine used to say he wished the word city had more than 4 letters in it. City man arrested, city shooting. Meanwhile, somebody shot in the suburbs, and you know, it's like just outside of city shooting. There's crime. There's crime. You deal with it. We have an excellent police force. We have 145 police officers. We have a chief who's an intellectual hiding under a Philadelphia street cop persona, and you continue to battle with it. I will say this, if you're in the city of Lancaster, which is basically 4 square miles, I mean, it's 7 square miles total, but almost everybody lives in 4 square miles. 60,000 people in 4 square miles. If something happens, you call. What do our police pride themselves on? Response time. How fast they can get to something. Within minutes at most. If it's an emergency, they'll be there. Go to a rural area of Lancaster County and have an aggravated assault alongside the road in, let's say, Holtwood, and you know, your battery in your watch will go dead waiting for the state police to come. Really. So we have it. We have the only full-time paid fire department in the county. So public safety, we're there. And what was the other one, Steve?
Education.
Education.
Oh, education. You know, a lot of the perception of the cities, in my opinion, and I'll speak to groups outside the city, and somebody will ask me a question. This goes for crime and education. And I'll say to the person, listen and think about all the assumptions that went into that question. Some of it's racism, some of it's ethnic discrimination, some of it's just overall stereotyping of people in the city. You just have to deal with it and confront it. With education, our standards are not where they should be. We have to continue to struggle with that. I'd like to see 1 school district per county. That way you would spread out not only the tax burden, but recent studies have shown that economic integration is the best for educational attainment. Poor kids, rich kids, middle class kids, put them all together, forget about ethnicity, forget about race, and it happens. They all rise. They all come up. We certainly don't have that in Lancaster. I don't know about the other counties, but in Lancaster, the city schools are integrated. Outside the city schools, it's hit and miss completely as to any type of integration. So, you know, we struggle with it, we recognize that some of it's stereotypes and some of it's real. I meet once a month with the superintendent of schools, and we talk about how we can work together, what we can do to make things better for each other, and we just have to continue to work on it.
I guess one of the questions that I would ask, so that maybe one of the others can jump in on this. My understanding of Harrisburg and York, I don't know about Lebanon, is that the school district configuration is different. And that is that while Lancaster does have the school district including some relatively affluent areas outside the district, both Harrisburg and York are confined to the city itself. Is that correct? I don't know what's Lebanon.
Same.
Same.
True for Harrisburg.
Yeah, okay. That I guess adds an additional challenge for the three.
We have Lancaster Township, but an awful lot of the people in Lancaster Township send their kids. So not all by any stretch, but it does provide additional tax revenue.
Right.
I'd love to talk about the education issue for a minute because I've been criticized by some for saying that Harrisburg won't have any type of recovery. We won't. There's no point really talking about a housing strategy unless we can improve our school system. We are at the very bottom of the state. We are under the Recovery Act of the state. We have a state-appointed recovery officer, but basically, they have amended the plan now over the course of the past year to the point where the standards are incredibly watered down. It calls for educational improvement, but just improvement is the word. Not educational success, not a quality education for every student in the Harrisburg School District. It's not even a goal. It's not even an aspiration. education has to be aspirational. And it has and has basically been now ensconced in this state-run plan, which really has no means of successfully achieving a quality education goal over the course of the next 4 or 5 years for the school district, and that's a real problem. I've also called on the school district to engage in a forensic audit. There's a lot of money that was misspent over the years in the school district, and we're basically at the point where everyone knows it's not working, but nobody wants to talk about that, in part because I think it's just easier to hopefully believe that everything is going very well. And I think mayors, my experience is that, the mayor's not in control of the school district, but it's very important that the mayor sort of spotlights the school district and what's going on. And when it comes to crime and taxes, I want to say that crime was at the centerpiece to everything else that we were doing. And we have implemented a true neighborhood community policing based strategy, very different from what we've had in the past, in which our officers are now basically graded and held accountable for the interactions that they have with the public. They have to go back, they have to report on their patrols, they have to have a certain number of engagements with youth and with the community, trying to be much more proactive. And we're hoping that that model pays dividends. In a short period of time, it's worked very well, and we've begun to repair the relationship between the neighborhood crime watch organizations and the police department as well, getting that functioning. We've got a terrific community policing coordinator who's been out there. And on the tax side of things, while I certainly agree with the concept of property tax reform, I mean, I think Harrisburg is probably the only city without a LRTA, and we need to get one at the moment. And that has become a sort of hot button issue. There are things that we can do for potentially a future CRIS, and there's still the KOZs and a variety of other options. But we definitely need a LRTA, and we need to recognize the degree to which, especially the school tax, is really basically the city could do whatever it wanted with taxes. We could abate the city's portion of the taxes by 100%. And the taxes would still be an impediment to real development just on the school side alone.
So from that perspective, I think we try to work with the school district. We found it best to be a partner with them and have them alongside of us monthly. The school district superintendent is in a cabinet meeting with my cabinet, and we discuss issues that are relative and how best we can approach it together. This has been with the current superintendent and the last one that we had. And we realize we have no control over the school district, but it is a huge part of the city of York's development, city of York housing, everything is around our school district. So we do try to engage them and be in great partners with us and help promote the city of York. And as Mayor Gray said, while we don't ignore the issues, we do. And we highlight the positives that are going on in the city of York, everything from our community policing to the redevelopment that is occurring in the city of York. And the negative press is going to be out there. The city of York is going to continue. We know that in perpetuity, all cities will remain, regardless of who the reporter is. So it's best for us to tell our story and get it out there. Our crime is flatlined as well too, but you wouldn't believe it by picking up any of our newspapers or turning on the television. And so what we have to do is tell the stories ourselves the best way that we can. And we find, again, partnerships being the best way to get that message out. Everything from the business community, the faith community, our higher education institution environment, as well as through the school district.
I don't want to repeat everything that the other mayor said, but I could say ditto to all of them except for the school issue in Harrisburg. Perception definitely is not the reality. Our crime for the past decade has been decreasing, but again, you wouldn't know that from reading the paper. They do the same thing, unfortunately, city, and someone got murdered in a neighboring township, and they found them in the city. It's just seriously. We have a great partnership with our school district as well. We serve on each other's committees, as well as Harrisburg Area Community College and the vocational school. Again, some great partnerships with other county agencies. We're trying to form a business improvement district in our downtown to try and help with the reinvestment in the downtown, and again, talking about the upper level development as well. So again, much of the same things that the other mayors have said, again, not to repeat.
Thank you. We should have allocated an hour and a half or 2 hours for this particular part, because I think that this has been an engaging discussion. I do know that the schedule says that we were done 5 minutes ago, and they're getting the wine and cheese set up. What I would encourage you to do, though, and that is to lock the door. Don't let them leave until you have had the opportunity, over a glass of wine, to have a discussion with them on a particular issue that you may have or question that you may have. I want to thank the mayors. I think they've done a marvelous job. And I want to remind you, again, George said, make sure that you fill out your overall evaluations for the day so that the organizations that have sponsored this can know how we did and where we go from here. So with that, join us for wine and cheese and honor one of the mayors.